This is the introduction to section 4.6, part 1, congruence in right triangles. Okay, so today's objective here is we're going to prove that right triangles are congruent using the hypotenuse and leg theorem. Now, this one's a little bit different because these are a little bit more specifics about what type of triangles we have. You'll notice we're talking about right triangles. Okay, so let's talk about the pieces and parts of a right triangle because they're very important in being able to identify them and being able to use them to prove that triangles are congruent. So in a right triangle, the side opposite the right angle is called the hypotenuse. So if you take the right angle here and you go opposite of that right angle, that means you go furthest away, the opposite of that, that's the hypotenuse. Or in other words, the hypotenuse is always the longest side of a right triangle. Okay? The other two sides are called the legs. So you've got the hypotenuse opposite of the right angle, and the other two sides are what we call the leg. Okay? Another way to think of this, the right angle always points to the hypotenuse. So you see the box there, the sharp point of the box, the right angle, it always points to the hypotenuse. That's another way to think of it as well. These are very important to be able to identify a hypotenuse and a leg in a right triangle because they're going to play into how we're going to prove that two right triangles are congruent, which leads me into the hypotenuse leg theorem. Okay, theorem 4.6, the hypotenuse leg theorem. We call it the HL theorem, stating for the hypotenuse and a leg. So, here's what the theorem says. It says, if the hypotenuse and a leg of one right triangle are congruent to the hypotenuse and a leg of another right triangle, then the triangles are congruent. Now, the very important thing here with the hypotenuse leg, you can only use hypotenuse leg if you have right triangles. That's the only time you can use the hypotenuse leg theorem, is that if there's right triangles. So, it says here, if triangle PQR and triangle XYZ are right triangles, and then it says that the hypotenuses are congruent to each other, XZ and PR, and then it says another one of the legs, PQ and XY. Again, it doesn't matter what leg it is. As long as one leg and one hypotenuse are congruent to each other, we can say that the two triangles are congruent to each other. Okay? So it's another way to prove triangles are congruent. But in this case, it has to be right triangles. If it's not right triangles, you cannot prove that the two triangles are congruent by HL theorem. Okay. All right. Some conditions for HL theorem, some things that you're going to look for, some things that you're going to have to make sure that you put in your proofs, and they're along in your proofs. Okay. First thing is you have to be able to show that there are two right triangles. Now you need to know that there's a right angle first. So some of the things that we're going to be going through and looking at, you're going to have to be able to show that there are two right triangles there. Well, before that, you're going to have to show that there's two right angles as well. Okay? The triangles have to have congruent hypotenuses. So the hypotenuses have to be congruent to each other, or the side that is opposite of the right angle. And then the last part is there is one pair of congruent legs. So these are the three things you're looking for. Two right triangles, two hypotenuses that are congruent, and two legs that are congruent. One pair of hypotenuses and one pair of legs that are congruent. That's what you're going to look for in your proof to put in your steps. Okay? So this is an important part here, the conditions for the HL theorem. Okay, now let's take a look here at an example of a proof. Okay? So in the given it says angle PRS and angle RPQ are right angles. And we also know that SP is congruent to QR. And that's what we have marked here in our picture with the two right angles as well. And we want to prove that triangle PRS is congruent to triangle RPQ. Okay, that's what we want to prove. So I've already marked in the proof the given part. Okay, so we can mark this down as the given. Now, couple things to help you identify what you're trying to do. Okay. The first thing, again, you want to do, you look back at those three things. We want to show that we have a right triangle. Then we want to show the hypotenuse are congruent. Then we got to show that the legs are congruent. Now, some of this might be in your given. Okay? Some of this might be in your given. So as you look at the picture here, we can identify, let's see if there's any one of these three things are in the given. Well, we know that we have right angles, but we haven't stated that they're right triangles. We're going to have to state that in there. Okay? So this is something that's going to look to be in your proof. We have to state that they're right triangles. As you look at the pictures, you'll notice you see the triangle on the left opposite of the right angle and opposite of the right angle. Those sides are congruent. Well, these are the hypotenuses. Well, we can check that off our list. That's the second thing. The hypotenuses are congruent. Now, do we have anything else in there? Well, no, we don't have any other sides in there. We need to figure out what other possible legs would be congruent to each other. So I need in my proof to put down eventually that I need to show that they're right triangles, and I need to show that the legs are congruent. And then once I do that, I can prove that the triangles are congruent by HL theorem. Okay. So as I look at my second statement, all right, the one thing here that would be obvious is that PR is congruent to PR. And we know that that's congruent to each other by the reflexive property. It's the side that they share. Now, if I mark this, you'll notice that PR and PR, these guys right here, are the legs of the triangle. So now if I go down to my checklist here, I can check off, okay, I've got the legs. Now I need to say that they're right triangles. Okay? So, as I go through and I do this, I'm going to say that triangle PRS and triangle RPQ are right triangles. Now, how do I know that they're right triangles? Well, I know that they have a right angle in there because in the given it said PRS and RPQ are right angles. So if a triangle has a right angle in it, we know that it's a right triangle. This is what we call the definition of a right triangle. If it has a right angle in it, we know that that it's a right triangle. Okay? So, again, in the given I said up here that they're right angles. As long as I have that, I know I can say that they're right triangles to each other. So now I can go back to my list here. I can mark this off. Now I've got all three of these. Now I can say that triangle PRS is congruent to triangle RPQ by the HL theorem, or the hypotenuse leg theorem. Okay, so I'm able to say that again because I have a right triangle. Okay, so this concludes section 4.6 part 1 notes. Make sure you complete your WSQ when you are finished.